Do you need to put headphones on or something?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but I hear echo on your side.
Oh, you do? Okay, well, if you do, then I'll put the damn things on. I hate them.
I can hear you, but I hear echo.
Oh, but that's because
Audio
of this.
check.
Well, if you do, then I'll put the
Audio
damn
check.
things on. That's the echo. Oh, no, hang on. I can't. That's going to be a disaster.
Audio check. Audio check. Audio check. Audio check. Audio check. Audio check.
Are you back?
I'm here.
Okay, are you here?
Yeah, I never left.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, but we lost screen contact for a minute. I hope everything's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It still says it's live.
Good. Okay. So anyhow, okay. On the 8th, I had all this thing written out. On the 8th day of Christmas. Happy New Year, everybody. This is Charles Lincoln in New Orleans and Ed LeBoutier in Tucson, Arizona. Are you in Tucson?
I am.
Yeah, Tucson.
Technically, I'm not in the city, but whatever. I'm in the area.
What's the county called?
Pima County.
Pima County. Okay. So you're in the Tucson metropolitan area, as they say these days.
Yeah.
Anyhow, today is New Year's Day, 2024, brand new year, and it is, of course, also the 8th day of Christmas. Well, that's what we're here to talk about. Is it really something to cheer about? Because I was thinking about the 14 words. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for our children. Okay. That is our credo as nationalists and as I would say as human beings. Never mind as nationalists. I would say that this is our most important duty as human beings, is to make the world safe for our progeny and for basically people, the people to whom we are most closely related. Yeah. This is our duty, and it is natural law, and
or religious. I mean, what in the Genesis, it's go forth and multiply, right?
Right.
So it comes from the Christian God also.
And yet, the modern Christian church says that to want to propagate our race and to preserve our race is sinful. And so here on New Year's Day, here in the middle of the 12 days of Christmas, I have you, an Odinist priest, to discuss. You're a Gothi, right?
Yes.
And that is a very interesting thing because, to the degree that I'm an Anglo-Saxon, I assume I had ancestors about 1,700 years ago who looked up to priests like you and followed directions from priests like you. And that is why this is the subject of religion is so relevant and so important to a program called legal realism. In the common law of England, and really the civil law of most European nations, common law of England, civil law of almost every, the Bible is the origin of our law. It is the basis for so much of our formal written law, because there was no significant body of written law in England, unless you count Roman law. And Roman law, of course, was highly flexible. And Roman law was actually only written down as a code under the Emperor Justinian, who was a Christian, in the 6th century. And so the whole concept of having a code of law, do you happen to know what the third book of Moses, Deuteronomy, what that word means?
I don't.
Deuteronomy, right after Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, then you get Numbers. What's the 5th book? I can't remember. Leviticus. That's the Torah, and that book Deuteronomy could be translated into English literally as the second restatement of the law. Deuteronomia, the second law. The first law, of course, is the one given in Exodus on Mount Sinai, and then in Deuteronomia in Greek, you get a much more elaborate statement of the law, and
So
there is,
let
of
me
course,
just
a series.
even
I was
though
just
the
going to say
law, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just
Finish.
going to say there is a series of legal digests in the United States today called the Second Restatement of the Law. It's kind of ironic.
So in contrast to what you're saying, even though the law wasn't written down, it was highly codified throughout Europe, especially among whatever you want, pre-Christians. I don't like most of the terms that are used to uniquely identify them. But so, for example, the Vikings had lawgivers, and the lawgiver was required to memorize the law. And every year at the thing, he was required to, from memory, cite the entire law. And so every year the law was reestablished for the people from the memory of the lawgiver. So that's how it was done.
So it was. You're saying by oral tradition it was preserved, but
Yes.
totally dependent on the memory of a few very select people.
Yeah. But it
And the only,
was formalized. I mean, you're talking about a time again through oral tradition, and these people had great memories that they could completely remember everything, and we still have that ability today. For me, it just takes a lot of practice to memorize long passages.
well, sure. I mean, but I mean, for example, the original composition of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey was memorized orally and sung. Uh, they apparently put it to some sort of music, and it would have been quite amazing if you think about staying up all night and listening to someone singing the Iliad and the Odyssey. But it would be even. I mean, did they sing the written law, the unwritten law?
I don't. They didn't sing it. They were required to recite it, but there were a number of formal manners of singing that also most of those people were required to know.
Well, okay. I guess the problem being that we don't know exactly what those laws were, and uh, I'm familiar with the Icelandic sagas, and
So
the
they did eventually get written down, and
only I believe.
so most of those laws did eventually get written down, 12, 1300s, mostly, as I recall, in Sweden. So they are available.
It might.
The
I mean, I
contents
hate
of
to
the
say it,
law.
but
But again,
it's kind of an interesting thing because I'm just to check with you. You said that this is primarily on Icelandic. As the only name of any lawgiver that I know, I believe Njal, uh, uh, Njal Thorgeirsson was
okay.
a lawgiver in Sweden, and he's the focus of what's called Njal saga.
Sure.
And
Snorri Sturluson in Iceland is another lawgiver.
oh, he was.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't realize that was his job. I guess I thought he was more of a priest. Uh,
No,
he was so he was like the lawgiver to the Swedish crown.
I guess off the top of my head, I don't recall all of the history, but I seem to recall that he was a lawgiver. I mean, the good thing about that is it requires the law to be succinct and understood by everybody. Whereas today, the US code is, I don't know, several hundreds of books worth, and I doubt that anybody's read them all or even understands half of them.
It's very difficult. Okay, Snorri Sturluson. Actually, he was. I didn't realize he was Icelandic his entire life. He wasn't Swedish. Snorri Sturluson was an Icelandic historian, poet, and politician. He was elected twice as law speaker of the Icelandic parliament, the Althing. Okay. My ignorance. Amazing. Um, so,
But that's, I mean, it doesn't really matter.
well, I
I
mean,
guess
I guess what I, I guess what I'm struggling with is what was the relationship then between Icelandic religion or Norse religion and Norse or Icelandic law? Because I
so.
think that,
By the time that Snorri Sturluson um, was the lawgiver, um, Iceland had been Christian, I believe, 200 years. At a certain point, in order to get the patronage of I believe, the Norwegian king at the point, they had to officially become Christian, and so. But many of their views and such remained, even though religiously they had to become Christian.
okay, so but that's more of a legal requirement in itself, isn't it? But what I was
Right.
talking about was, uh, what inspires people, and this is one of my biggest concerns. What inspires people to obey the law? What other than brute force? I mean, I'll whip you, or I'll beat you, or I'll put you in jail, or I'll kill you if you don't do what I'm saying. That's the brute force. That's what we basically have in the land of the free and the home of the brave today. We have
And
law that
I think the answer to that is moral authority, right? So in the
okay,
eyes of the people, it has some authority, and thereby they follow it. So yes, I think is it called force majeure? The threat of force,
force
as
majeure. I mean, that's one word for it, certainly. But I I'm thinking that the moral power, obviously, is what really keeps people in a civil society. And I just wonder, I, I just wonder, how do we achieve uh, a firm legal system? I mean, right? I think one of the big problems in America right now is that our law has no moral authority, and I think the moral authority of law in the United States is decaying minute by minute, day by day more. I think that the whole business with Trump is pushing our system to a crisis. The whole thing with January 6th is pushing our system to a crisis because such blatantly political manipulations of the highly complex law that we're talking about. I mean, the multi uh, faceted and complex series of indictments in Georgia and the District of Columbia and New York. I mean, they are so desperate to put this man in jail for whatever reason. I honestly don't quite get it. I mean, it may, as somebody said, I think it was uh, Stephanie Sledge last week who said that it appears to be some sort of psyop, and
I believe that. Yeah, I mean,
perhaps the point.
so I think the answer to this we talked about in the past. I believe that the U.S. government became infiltrated by the communists in the 50s, if not the 60s, 40s, if not the 50s, 60s. Um, they recognized that someone like Trump, and in doing so, they had stolen authority, and people accepted that. When I was a child, If it came on television and it was taught in the schools, then that's what the truth was, and it reflected and resonated with our own views very closely. But I think that they've lost that authority, and now they're in trouble. So they recognize that someone like Trump represents what they call populism, which is basically democracy. The will of the people, and they realize that they've lost the will of the people. So that's a existential threat for them. So not only
Well,
have they
it's an existential threat to the existence of the country. And I guess, let's be fair to them. You and I are part of an existential threat to their country too. Uh,
Oh no,
you know,
I would
or,
never
or
say
we,
that publicly.
huh? We'd
I would
like to
never
be.
say
No, it's
I would never say
our.
that publicly.
I would. I do. You know,
Uh,
I think that we are. I want to be, if I am remembered at all, I would like to be remembered as a threat to the New World Order. I hope that I'm not a martyr to the war, the conflict with the New World Order. But if I end up being one, so be it. Uh,
sure.
it's it's. But again, that's in part because I grew up in this religion that highly values martyrdom. Of course, so did the Norse. So did the Norse.
Yeah.
The Norse valued
Yeah.
the highest heaven, as I understand it, of Norse religion was to go to Valhalla, which you could pretty much only enter if you died.
So I mean, it was.
Died in battle. Died in
It's
battle.
more complicated than that. I mean, each of the gods and goddesses can bring up people as they feel necessary. Um, Actually, Freya got the first half of the battle dead, and then Odin got the second half. And yes, they could pull people up to, was it Folkvang and Valhalla, according to Norse.
Well, there was
Uh,
more than, there was more than one. There was more than one heaven. More than
Yeah,
one
well, no, there's one
paradise.
heaven. There's Asgard, but there are multiple gods and goddesses there, and each of and they all have their own agency and they can do whatever they want. For example, Frigga, who is kind of recognized as being the goddess of domestic affairs, was known to bring up people who were highly devoted couples, marriage. So she valued married couples and devoted married couples, and she could bring them up to her um, kingdom castle.
Her version of, I mean, I know the
And Paul,
Wagnerian. I know the Wagnerian version of this better than I know I guess the Sturluson or Grimm brothers version of it. But so
so
we're
Valhalla is the hall of the Valfather, and the Valfather is the father of the fallen.
and
Um, so that's
it's
what Valhalla is.
oh,
Pardon me?
I thought it was from like value or worthy, the Hall of
No,
the Worthy.
Valhalla is Odin is known as Allfather
Yeah.
or Valfather. So Allfather is father of all, or Valfather is the father of the fallen.
All right. So you had to get that to be in that heaven. So I was right that to get into Valhalla specifically, you had to die in battle or suicide.
Not
Suicide.
suicide.
Well, suicide
Uh,
was suicide,
you had to die in battle.
but suicide was a member of a method of sacrifice to Odin.
Not that I know of. But I could
I
be
read
wrong.
that it was. Uh,
I mean, it would normally be seen that as long as you have agency, you should utilize that agency to fight for what is good.
Well, anyhow, we're kind of getting on a little bit of a tangent here into
Sure.
details of Norse religion, but it is relevant because you're talking about I have thought that Valhalla had to do with values. You're saying it had to do with specifically falling in battle, but
Yes.
if it's specifically about falling in battle, then that concept of a form of martyrdom obviously was a key part of Norse religion. You
Yes.
achieved something holy by going into the battlefield and dying, and I I don't know. I mean, did they distinguish between people who died for a good cause and a bad cause? I mean, if they were to look at World War II, would they have distinguished between those who were fighting for Germany and those who were fighting for Soviet Russia, for instance,
I
or
don't
was
believe
it
so. I mean,
all who died?
so one way to look at it is the reason the Einherjar, Odin's selected, um, were to prepare for Ragnarok, and the final battle of good and evil. So, I mean, yes, you could be a criminal and die doing criminal things, and you won't go to Valhalla. But I mean, these are esoteric religious
No, but I
issues.
mean, again, my point is, I want to getting to what my point is.
Okay.
My point is that can you have an integrated and cohesive society without a higher set of values? I mean, in essence, when I travel around Greece, for instance, I look at the way the Homeric wars are depicted on the temples. And what I realize when I'm looking at those temples is that it was not a story. It was not a TV story. It was not merely for entertainment. The Homeric uh, sagas, if you will, uh, the Homeric epic. It was the constitution, the basic constitution of Greece. It told people the values of their society and how society should be organized. The template of the family of Olympus, of Olympia rather, on Mount Olympus, was the template of how people should govern themselves in this world. And I just wonder, we've gone through several different constitutional myths in this country. We started off with the myth of the revolution, uh, the the myth of overthrowing King George. Basically the myth that was articulated in the Declaration of Independence that the king
Sure.
had done all sorts of terrible things to us, and that we had a right or duty to overthrow him. And Sam and I talk about how this is it's large. The Declaration of Independence is largely a lie, or at best a massive exaggeration of the
I don't
evils of.
believe so. So, you know, um, Aristotle said ethical thinking is from principle and then from first principle. So, something like the Declaration of Independence establishes first principles, and it provides first principles that people can reason from and apply to their lives, and establish new principles. And so when you talk about the Greek society, um, they had what some might call an ancestral principle, that they had a religious obligation to continue telling the story of their ancestors and to memorize and to remember their ancestors regularly. And so that's what they were doing. Uh, in many ways, the ancestral principle overruled, you know, the laws of man, whatever you want to call that. Um, their ancestry was a fundamental aspect of their society, of their religion, of who they were as individuals. They defined themselves in terms of their descent from their ancestors, great ancestors,
Yeah.
hopefully. Uh,
And some of their ancestors were gods. I mean,
yes,
in most of the early genealogies, I mean, as I understand it, the Saxon kings of England, or the ancestors of the Saxon kings of England, actually trace their ancestry to Wotan, Odin,
yes, yeah, and some of them
and
to Freyr, and some of them to Freyr. So there was the Yngling family, and Ing is Freyr. So some of them traced to Freyr, some of them traced to Odin, others traced to other either great individuals or gods and goddesses. Yes.
okay, so indeed, uh, the continuities of of society were dependent, and therefore the laws, the norms, in other words. You were talking about norms last week, I think. Uh,
Right.
the normative continuity in society was dependent upon a close relationship between religion and law. And this is what I was saying about the way I grew up in the American South, was believing in basically a whole cultural political concept of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants descended from England, coming to America, creating this country, and it was a basically white Anglo-Saxon Protestant country. And so religion, law, and race and politics were all coherent. Except,
Right.
obviously, by the time I was born, that was already falling apart. But as a child, I didn't know it, and my parents didn't tell me. I had to learn the hard way. That the value system I grew up with was kind of already archaic by the day I was born. But in
I wouldn't argue. I would say not archaic if you continue and carry it forward. That's how
Okay, but I mean,
culture is supposed to be.
I'm a minority uh, in my immediate neighborhood. In my immediate neighborhood, I'm a minority of one.
Well, and
I'm
I would
surrounded.
argue. I
I'm in
would
uptown
argue
New Orleans, surrounded by
you've explained
California
why.
liberals.
From my
Hmm?
perspective, you explained why. You said their churches call me a heretic. Well, my answer is stop believing in their churches. Stop believing in the authority of their churches. Establish what you know is right and carry it forward.
And that is a revolutionary act, because the churches here, the four Episcopal churches uptown, are all Confederate monuments in essence.
But and I that would be the basis of quote unquote being a Protestant is you don't have to believe in a centralized church. You can read the Bible for yourself. You can carry it forth as you see fit. That's to me is the core principle of Protestantism. You're protesting the central authority, specifically of the Catholic Church, but why not the Baptist Church or whatever?
Well, okay. I mean, again, this is why I hope that you'll join us on Wednesday, and we can continue this with Sam, because the whole thing is it's all falling apart, and Protestantism has this, as you said, anti-central tendency. And what is the big problem that the American South had during the American Civil War? uh, our our philosophy of states' rights was incompatible as a military strategy for beating the North. Uh,
I mean, the
Abraham
South did
Lincoln,
pretty darn good. I mean, there was just in the long run, yeah, they lost out, but I
big
mean,
time.
they had, they had there were times when they were doing quite well.
Well,
To me,
it doesn't help the history of, dare I say, white supremacy, that we lost that war big time. We lost, we lost, and just as Germany lost. And losing major wars is, in a Darwinian sense, and some would say that Darwinian evolutionism was the religion that really started taking hold in the late 19th century in England and other places, anyhow. It began replacing Christianity. And this, again, is the kind of philosophical and moral problem that I want to really get into, is how in the process of nation building, and obviously, if we want to save our very vision of America, or Europe for that matter, America, Europe, or Australia, as far as that goes, we're going to have to do some serious nation building, because
yes.
the nation that we would like to see, the nation that we idealize, is gone. And so I am asking the question.
So I,
Um,
I have a problem with the way you're using the term nation. In many cases, you're using the term nation as synonymous as citizen and nations. I mean, obviously, you and I still have our nationality. We don't accept this new world order they're trying to impose upon us because it's contrary to our national interests. And in that term, I mean, I'm using, I like I said, I quote unquote am an ethno-nationalist. So that means the ethnos, descent. Those are the bases of nations. And when a state comes along, they want to declare authority. What did in Thus Spake Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche said, the state is the coldest of all cold monsters, and coldly it lies too. And this lie creeps from its mouth. I, the state, am the people. And he says, it's a lie. Everything they have, they stole. So, you have to reject the monster would be my position.
That's really, I don't remember that line from everything they have, they stole. That's basically a quote from Marx.
It's Friedrich Nietzsche of the New Idol in Thus Spake Zarathustra, or Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't really like that book very much, but that one section I really enjoyed. Because he talks in let me kind of paraphrase. He talks about it, and I'm trying to do it off the top of my head. But he's in that same passage. He says, "Somewhere there are peoples." Well, actually, that's somewhere there are peoples, but not here. Here we have the state. And then he goes on, the state is the coldest of all cold monsters, and coldly it lies too. And this lie creeps from its mouth. I, the state, am the people. And he says, where a people exist, there they reject the state as a lie. And I don't remember the exact terminology, as a lie and an attack on all that is good and bad. So anyways, I think, at least that one poem to me kind of has always spoken to me about how we should see ourselves with regard to the state. And it's not so. Most nations on the planet do not have their own state. They would like, many nations would like, and in fact, that's the principle of the rise of nationalism, is the idea that each nation should have its own state. But
that was basically a 19th century concept.
Yeah, and it's a moral concept that people should be self-determining, determine for themselves within their own community how how they should be living, and to give it over to some foreign people who merely happen to have the rule of military force over them doesn't make it moral.
In the modern world, it's more like the rule of money that buys military force and everything else. I mean, the modern world is all about money.
Yeah. Well, and money is power, So we should not shun money, would be my argument. It's not that
we can't shun money. I'm just saying that it's not merely saying it's military power. Again, thinking about Aristotle, military power is what I believe Aristotle would call the efficient cause of state power, but the final cause of state power would be money and the people who control the money, basically the banking system.
I mean, he talks about, and specifically Aristotle, and we're not going into an Aristotle lesson here, but I think that there's some important ideas. He talks of six forms of government, by who rules and for whom they rule. So, a tyrant is a single person who rules for his own interests. I can't remember the term he used, but a king is somebody who rules for the people's interests. An oligarchy is a group of people who rule for the people's interests, whereas I think tyranny was a group of people who rule for their own interests. And then a polity is a group of people, all of the people ruling for all of their interests, whereas a democracy is people ruling for their own interests. And he called democracy the worst form of government because the people are too selfish in that form to realize a good society. A polity requires that the people put the interests of the nation ahead of their own personal interests.
Okay, well, I mean that's a very pleasant ideal. And how do we achieve a society where people share enough, where a sufficient number of people share positive values about what society should be to create a general good, and can we do that without some form of unified religion? That is really my goal here, is to explore the relationship between religion, politics, and law. Because if people don't carry some form of law in their hearts, in their spirit, you know, you get uh, what we've got in America right now, which is law without values. It is solely because of money and military might that the government of the United States and most states can enforce their laws. There is very little sense of shared values, uh, even in the culture of woke.
Yeah.
It's just grab what you can for yourself, taking advantage of the parts of the law that are good for you. The rich people uh, benefit from manipulations in tax laws and securities laws. Poorer people, black people, benefit from the values of woke and civil rights and so-called equality. Uh, and in essence, people in the middle, uh, like you and me, we have very little in common with either the big money class or the mobs out in the street tearing up stores to get Nike shoes.
Right.
Neither one of those are really our world, and yet we are the ones who are talking about sort of trying to reconstruct society and how to and I'm really interested this time of year. I mean, the Christmas season, and as we start a new year, to ask this question: what kind of shared values can we have that would make the 14 words a reality? For instance, I would like to see a world where the 14 words was a statement of polity, what you're calling Aristotelian polity,
Right.
and yet to get everybody on the same page with a pro-white set of values.
Well, so and I think again Aristotle kind of defines that, right? So what's the problem? You've got everybody in the democracy, as he identified it, voting for or working for their own interests, and the distinction is from a polity, which is the people working for some common interests. And so bad leaders, you know, stroke the desire for personal interests over common interests, and so that's what the people follow. If there's nothing to, no moral authority imposing on them the desire to do the right thing, then they're on their own and they're gonna do what they think is individually right. Now and
Now,
so
we've come full circle to where is that moral authority going to come from today? It won't come from Christianity. It won't. At least it won't come from the Christian church. The mainstream Christian churches are against it,
so
and so it won't come from them. Now, and I mean, can you I mean, and you say that you aren't really seeking to convert all white people to Odinism. I mean, I guess there was some rumors anyhow that in the Third Reich, Hitler may have wanted, or maybe Himmler wanted to convert Germany back to a pagan state. That
I thought he was pretty Catholic, but whatever.
Well, Hitler was, by all outward appearance, Catholic, but there were, the Ahnenerbe, and the and basically a group of people around Himmler in particular were very much into a certain mysticism and return to pre-Christian religion. And I mean, I'm not sure that that would have worked in Roman Catholic and Protestant
Well,
Germany.
I think the answer is pretty clear. First of all, um, you know, referencing what I said before, anthropologists recognize a number of innate tendencies in people, characteristics, universal characteristics. One of them is spirituality, which is religion, and the other is in-group identification. And in-group identification converted to an ideology is, well, one of the forms is nationalism. So communism is the opposite of that. Communism advocates for individual over nation. So how did we and I would argue that the founders of the United States, although they dealt with a moral people who were themselves religious, there were a number of different sects or whatever you want to call them that they could not unify the people on religion alone. So therefore they did it through nation or nationality. Well, I mean, actually, they didn't even try to do that. They set up a state, uh, which was a state of states, the United States, right? And they presumed that the states themselves would be good, and that moral law would rule within the states. But so I mean, I've done some historical looking into, for example, Jefferson. He's one of the framers, so he had complementary goals, or let's say contradictory goals, because on the one hand, he wanted the United States to become as great as Rome was. And so a lot of the structure that they put into the United States is based upon the Roman structure, which is why we have senates and all that kind of good stuff. But on the other hand, he's also the one who said only what was it, moral or good white men could become citizens, and codified that into the law. And when he said, in the term that became means if they weren't already, because they were born as citizens, then becoming in that case is becoming, basically acquiring a new identity or a citizenship. So
Naturalization.
naturalization, that's the word. I'm sorry, I couldn't remember it. So that's why I don't personally think, I mean, I think that there are good principles, especially in um, the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence was intended to be a moral document, and the Constitution was intended to be an organizational document, no different than, the bylaws of a corporation. And then people go, well, and because what was going on in France at the time, people goes, oh, what about a Bill of Rights? We should throw in a Bill of Rights to make sure that the state represents the people, or that the people's rights are explicitly identified. So, anyways, so the historical reality is not as clean, I think, as people want to make out. But there's no
Oh
doubt that
no, it's not anything. That really isn't the point of this at all. I mean, no, historical reality is never clean. No question about that. I mean, a lot of things that a lot of rabbit holes we could trail down in what you're talking about there.
yeah.
But
But
the big
I think
question is,
so.
you know,
I think getting back to your question
we
earlier is, if it can't be on religion because there's so many different variations, it can be on nationality or race. And so um, that's why I believe and I promote, nationalism. Nationalism, people of many different religions and religious viewpoints can accept the principles of a nation as the basis of their society, and thereby move forward on that. That's, when I grew up, we believed in an American nation. It wasn't just citizenship, and anybody who stepped onto the continent was automatically, a member of our society, because what they weren't. If they didn't have the culture and they didn't adhere to or pledge themselves to the principles, they couldn't belong.
this is
So
again, this is kind of what I want to get across about foundational myth. And I never quite
Yeah.
finished that little
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
section. I said that when I'm in Greece, I realize that the Homeric myths are the foundational constitution of Greece. That those stories provide all the moral lessons that you need to be a meta member of the polity in Greece. And in the beginning of this country, we had the revolutionary myth, and then that was replaced after 1865 by the myth of the Civil War. And the Civil War largely became the defining myth in place of the revolution. It was crystallized one way 50 years after the end of the Civil War in Birth of a Nation, that basically we were going to be a white nation, basically a white supremacist nation that provided justice and stability for the other members of the population. But that movie and that synthesis of the post-Civil War era basically came out at precisely the time that communism was taking hold in Europe and its agents in the United States. And between 1865 and 1915, you had sort of uh, a healing period where the wounds of the Civil War were basically healed in favor of kind of a white nation, and uh, and yet adapting to the reality of a sizable black underclass who were accepted mostly as underclass. And then in from 1915 to 1965, you see sort of a reversal of that Civil War synthesis, where through the addition of
Once
the
the
myth.
communists infiltrated.
Yeah, well, I said that communist infiltration was starting at almost exactly the moment the Birth of a Nation came out.
Yes, absolutely.
You had Woodrow Wilson's two or three major policy changes 2 years before Birth of a Nation: the income tax, the Federal Reserve, and the enactment of the 17th Amendment, the repeal of state control over the Senate. Uh, and those those were the fundamental origins of what happened next, which was with World War One. You got the high centralization of this country, and then the contrast of this country with other countries outside. I mean, breaking the 150-year tradition of Washington, that the United States should be strictly an American policy, an American polity, and we entered on the global stage, starting with the Spanish American War, but really taking root, our global role in in World War One, and in the 1920s. You had another one of these sort of tense standoffs between the globalists who wanted us to join the League of Nations, it was called at that point, predecessor to the United Nations, and we never did. We never did. We remained, but then Roosevelt became president, and through World War II, he basically crystallized a new anti-nationalist synthesis, which under Truman, Eisenhower, and Johnson became an anti-white synthesis.
I don't disagree with what you've outlined. I think I think the bigger picture is that any society can become corrupted from its original principles, and somewhere along.
The way it's done is by changing the myth. That's what I'm going at. Of course,
Well, start a new myth or
hmm?
continue the old myth. That's what I
Well,
believe in doing.
okay,
I'm continuing the
but
old myth.
okay, but how do we get people? But again, I'm trying to get this very practical point in about religion. Without religion, without basically a form of proselytization, I guess you'd say, without how do we take control of the narrative and create a new myth, a new founding constitutional myth that will favor, what Greg Johnson a couple of months ago wrote was the American identity, the American white identity that you and I share, that all the
Yes.
members of our board share, that probably most people watching this show share, is an American white identity, which was pretty comfortable with the synthesis of 1860, and pretty comfortable with the resulting new synthesis of 1915 to 1920, but we've basically been kicked out in the synthesis of 1965. 1965 just happens to coincidentally to be the year that the immigration law changed, and that instead of having only whites from Northwestern Europe, or Western Europe rather, coming in, instead of that very select group of immigrants, basically starting in 1965, we threw it open to the world. And we said,
They
look
threw it
at
open
that.
to the world, but
Hmm?
they threw it open to the world, sure.
Well, they couldn't have done it without our parents' tacit consent. If our parents hadn't sat back and said, we're doing okay. We got our TV dinners and our TV shows and our football games, so we can stand to have a few Pakis and Haitians over here.
Well, and so getting back to the terminology used earlier, psyops, by a previous guest. The fact is, psyops did become a reality. Psyops, propaganda, whatever you want to call it, coming out of World War II. Before World War II, there was basically print media. Coming out of World War II, you had radio, you had television, these mass media forms that allowed the pacification of the population, the confusion or influencing of the whole populations, and our opposition did a good job with it. We, on the other hand, did a lousy job, and the internet is our opportunity to change that, and that's my view. Getting back to what you were saying, how do we do it? So the answer is leadership. You want
Okay,
change,
but
you got to be a leader. And
leadership
leadership
needs
first means
some good
defining
slogans.
vision and bringing about the action required to realize that vision. And
Defining vision. That's really what I'm talking about here. The defining vision and the values that are going to come together in that vision. Are we going to have some sort of religion that replaces the myth of civil right, of basically the Civil War, World War II, and what now woke and civil rights? I mean,
so
those are the elements of the modern American myth. What are we
my
going to do with
answer to
it?
that is yes. The answer is we need a new vision, and that new vision is what I call white nationalism. White nationalism has the potential to unify our people and to bring them to where they need to be. I'm not saying it's easy, but it has to be done. That's our job.
Okay,
And
you're a priest. Give me a sermon. I mean, we're approaching an hour, and try. Why don't you give me a sermon on your version of the myth that would unite people, that you would call upon to people to believe in one one people, one nation, one leader, for instance.
on the one hand, we have to live it, meaning you and I have to realize that vision. That it has to be a moral vision. It has to be something that they fundamentally believe is right, and that's why one of the reasons I was advocating, and I continue to advocate for natural rights ideas, and specifically utilizing some of the opposition's ideas against them, like that. What was that? The International Human Rights Treaties on what was it? Oh, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. A lot of people believe that there's something correct and right in that, and if we're not speaking to that, then we don't have any moral authority to them. So we have to be moral authorities. We have to talk about right and wrong. We have to, it's not enough to just say, oh, I got a vision to everybody paint a dot on their forehead. I mean, it has to be meaningful. We have to say what we're talking about fundamentally changes and improves their lives. And, nowadays there are people have tremendous number of grievances that we can talk to. They don't belong to communities anymore. They don't have real friends anymore. They have online lives. We can offer them, I believe, real lives, real friendship, real community. And we can build that community through the internet as well. But there has to be a real in IRL, in real life community behind that. And so us having this conversation is part of that, I think. Yes. But anyways, so the people, so there's a great book there called On Revolution by Chalmers Johnson. And Chalmers Johnson says revolutions happen in times of increased expectations. What's the term he uses? So
Absolutely.
people,
anyone who thinks that revolutions take place in times of increasing repression has got it all backwards. No.
Increased expectations, I believe that's the term. So people believe that more is possible, and they no longer believe the old lies. So we have to come up with new promises for the kind of society that people want to belong to, and build that so that it's not just a fake, internet website. Build real community, and over time, people will reject, embracing the lifestyles being promoted by our opposition. Everybody knows that it doesn't work. It can't work. So they are now looking for answers. How can we restructure our society? What rules should we have in our lives? We need to have the answers for them. And I believe that nationalism is that answer. In particular, white nationalism or your American nationalism, whatever you want to call it. They're not necessarily identical, but they're fairly close.
What's our motto or our battle cry? And first, let me say what I think the ones that have worked in the past are. Christianity came to dominate through a motto of salvation and life eternal, salvation from death, or earthly death, and life eternal. That was the big sales pitch of Christianity, if you will. The American Revolution was liberty. Very vague concept. Sam Dixon really hates the Declaration of Independence because he feels that in the Declaration of Independence opening line about all men are created equal,
but that's just an argument against the divine right of kings. That's all it means. People
all right, but nonetheless, it is a line that has been subject to such twisting and misinterpretation that it has really come to haunt us on a daily basis.
He didn't know, Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote that, didn't know the problems that we face. I interpret that line as equally free. So all men are created equally free. So, and by that is, again, so that's how I represent it. I believe
that was certainly not the reality of either English or American or French society.
But it was the ideal. It was the ideal.
But it was not the reality.
I'm watching right now. I'm watching the great courses on the French Revolution, and it started out with great ideas, but it eventually and immediately, actually, quite quickly, became totalitarian, and thereby it was totalitarian and started destroying the society.
So anyhow, we were just saying, Christianity had this great motto, basically, conquest of death. Follow Christ, follow the cross, and you will conquer death. American Revolution, liberty, liberty. That was on that was the motto on all the coins, all the plaques, and the symbol was basically.
So that's branding, and a lot of that came along later. But okay.
Well, no, it came right in the early days of the republic, and I'm talking about what they put on the coins and what they put on all the buildings and what their posters were. That's and then uh, liberty uh, became something else. I mean, basically the concept of liberty became kind of moot during the Civil War, and it became equality. Equality became written into the Constitution only in the 14th Amendment.
So I don't think many people believed in this equality idea. It came out of the French Revolution. As like I said, I'm going through the one of the courses right now.
Liberté, égalité, fraternité.
Right, and liberty, was, I would say, the primary ideal in the United States. And
Right.
but the communists who were also, communists are closely
Yeah.
related. The French communes, um, the Paris
Oh,
commune in particular.
the iconography of revolution was born in Paris. Absolutely,
Right,
no doubt about it.
and so, but they're pushing the totalitarian ideal of equality and now equity. Not that they believe any of that, I don't believe, but it's some of them do. It's a new religion for some of them. And we just have to reject their religion, help other people reject their religion, and instill them with our own, which is the belief in that religion itself, real religion, is important. People should live their lives morally. That we can form a society based on liberty, and it's going to be a good society because historically we can show when these ideas are embodied in the people, in a moral people, you have a good society. I think American society was generally good as I saw it up through the 60s and into the 70s. 80s started decaying, and by the 90s it was too late.
We're now 30 years past the 90s.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. But people know, everybody knows that the lies being promoted by our opposition, in particular, people who lie about us and lie about, what America is about, um, they know that it can't work anymore. I think that they've lost authority, and thereby, if we are going to assume authority, we have to have good, strong moral ideas. And I think that the good, strong moral ideas are the continuation of the society that we formed, our ancestors formed in this continent, and let's move that forward.
Do you have
I
any
don't.
do you have a proposal for uh, how, and by how I mean what would be our battle cry?
I mean, I have my own ideas. What motivates me, and that is,
All right.
it's okay to be white, right? It's good to be white. It's all right to be white.
That's not a
And
battle. That's not a battle cry. That's. I mean, I'm sorry. That is so passive. Of course, it's okay to be you. It's okay to be me for us. But is it okay for other people to say you may be okay for yourself, but you're not okay for us? We want
well,
white people who want to disappear.
I reject those people, and all people should reject them. I mean, we should make those people so it's both positive and negative. You have to build up your ideas and denigrate and destroy the opposition's authority. There's no way around that. Right now, if you think you can be nice and just say, well, can we all just get along? No, it's obvious we can't all just get along because they want to destroy our society. The very idea that it's okay to be white, that we can have liberty and freedom in our own society, they want to destroy that. I think that people will embrace the opportunity to continue. And so part of it's okay to be white, or it's all right to be white, is we have a culture, and we are a community, and we need to promote and push that community and culture forward. And
We don't.
we
We
have a
don't
right to
merely have.
self-determination.
We don't
What's that?
merely have a culture. We don't merely have a culture. We have basically the greatest culture that's the human species has ever produced.
I tend to agree with that.
I mean, everything that's important. I mean, the people of Asia and Africa basically have adopted almost everything that we created, right? They
Yeah,
they they
I mean,
dress like Westerners. They use Western technology. The Chinese and Japanese may make little improvements on it. Not saying they don't. They may have even perfected some things. Uh, cars and stereos and anime.
but
Uh,
our own people are rejecting our own culture. Our own culture requires a certain discipline. It requires certain formalities. We don't, I meet a person on the street, our own people don't even understand our own formalities. You know, Dress up nice, look good, be moral. These are very basic ideas, but, our
well,
people
that's of
seem to have
course
forgotten them.
I think you're talking about the triumph of cultural Marxism that says that you must reject all of that. Every kind of formality, every kind of decency is what cultural Marxism, the Frankfurt School, targets. Herbert Marcuse, in particular, and his ilk, basically we need to all. I mean, that their idea culture was hippie, basically,
So
and
I think for myself, again, you're saying what's the calling card or rallying cry,
what could
and
be our universal myth, our universal energizer,
I mean,
analogous
for me,
something. Hmm?
I think the answer is whites have rights, and people I think will embrace that because they know under the society that we exist now, we have no rights, and we know if this society continues, they will have no rights. So we, on the other hand, speak to where they're going to have rights, they're going to be valued members, they have a future. Um, I think all of those things, we represent those things. Now, I, what rallying cry? I mean, for me, it's whites have rights. Um,
It doesn't deal with the basic questions of life. I guess that's sort of what I'm saying, because it's uh, the liberty, equality, conquest of
Opportunity.
death. Those are all issues that relate to uh, everyone. I think that we need something that goes to the heart of human existence, and
So
maybe
then
the
come up
goal
with it.
should be, well, I'm saying that's what we're talking about. I'm not going to come. I refuse to try to come up with it on my own, because it will
Okay.
not be accepted widely if Charlie Lincoln, in his old place in New Orleans, comes up with it, and nobody else has heard of it. It has to be something that will get. I mean, I guess the thought that was sort of crystallizing is maybe our goal is humanity and nature, that our approach is humane and natural, that blood must triumph over technology, and that the wokeness is really paving the way. This so-called equality is actually paving the way for wiping out real humanity in a techno, a technocracy. That
Right.
humanity itself is threatened right now by people who want humans to be more like machines and machines to be more like humans. So that the transhumanism is really taking advantage of people who think in the ancient Greek way, the medieval European way, or people who think and act like Vikings, are the antithesis of uh, uh, transhumans. They know our relationship with blood and soil is the antithesis of of transhumanism, the merger of humans and robots. And maybe that is really the evolutionary struggle that we can latch on to, and and have as a big picture that will show. Because I mean, one thing we have to do is we have to show equity in this sense. We have to show that our system is not just best for us, it's best for everybody.
Well, and I think
I don't
nationalism
think,
as a universal principle absolutely is best for everybody.
because I mean, one of my favorite of all uh, black leaders was Marcus Garvey. You know about Marcus Garvey,
I do.
Jamaica? I mean, and he was a black leader who favored uh, back to Africa for all black people, and you know that is it's really a shame that he was stomped out so hard, and because that was a potentially humane human solution. Instead of instead of telling black people that they can only be fulfilled in the company of white people. I mean, which is what that's isn't that the basic message of integration?
Yeah.
That I mean, it's so horrible that white people don't want to associate with you because you can only fulfill your full existence as black people if you're sitting next to white kids in class. I mean, how is that ever going to improve black people?
Let's get back to your point there. So I disagree that we necessarily need a single rallying cry. And as proof of that, I would just say marketing. So Coke, it's the real thing. Well, there's your universal marketing brand for Coke, but it really doesn't mean a whole lot. I hear it and I go, well, what does it mean? So branding, on the one hand, only requires that a given idea be associated with a given reality. And in fact, marketing starts with segmentation. You identify the needs of this population, you identify the needs of this population, and your marketing is focused on the needs of the differing segments of a population. So,
Okay, but remember what modern marketing is in particular. It's all about a highly competitive, multifarious, and complex world of lots of corporations trying to get their piece of the pie, their shape of their share of the pie chart of the division of wealth. Or I mean, and how will that help create a new uh, a
but
new
see,
a new version of the old reality? I guess is what we're talking about.
branding does not require that there be a really strong idea. Coke, it's the real thing. People just, they hear it 17 times, they know it, they remember it from that point on, and they associate that with the brand or with the product.
Well,
Um,
part of the triumph of that was that that motto came with a really catchy song.
well, that only came in the, I'm
Uh,
old enough to remember when that song came out, in the
I do
70s,
too.
at least late 60s, early
19,
70s. But
1970,
Coke goes back
1970.
further than that. Coke,
Hmm?
Coke, it's a real thing. Just as an example, so there was a Coke going back, I forget what, 1890s or
Oh,
something.
it was invented in Atlanta by a former Confederate, actually.
Yeah,
But
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 then it started getting a lot of copies, and so in order to distinguish themselves, they came up with that catchphrase, "Coke, it's the real thing," saying we're the real ones. You know, so I guess white nationalism, it's the real thing. That would be my argument. We're the real people, the real right people who are going to lead this forward. But again, my point is that it, you know, branding only requires that you recognize the slogan and attach it to the particular entity that's being discussed or whatever, being sold or being. So, I think it's all right to be white. Um, you know, it's okay to be
I did.
white, whatever. I think
You
that's universally
you have
recognized.
taught you have taught me something I did not realize, that the real thing goes back to the 1940s. Huh,
Yeah.
amazing. I thought it
So
was that song that did it.
no, no, and so I mean, what was his name? Was it Bernays, who was the promoter of marketing ideas? The reason marketing is not just important because it's the way that people sell things, but it reflects realities in people's consciousness. And so despite, you can say people are using these realities for benign purposes or nefarious purposes. The fact is, people can attach a slogan or some recognizable symbol to an idea or a product. So on the one hand, yeah, we got to be able to do that. I don't necessarily think it takes a single one, because segmentation means we can identify some people are going to be, for people who feel that their rights are being downtrodden, whites have rights is going to be the motto that they're going to be attracted to. Whereas for, let's say, libertarians, maybe the concept of freedom is more important. So, white freedom is your freedom, something like that. So there can be multiple slogans, I think. But I believe we have to have real ideas behind our slogans as well. And I think nationalism, white nationalism, provides some real concrete ideas. Most people don't understand them, but I mean, let me tell you. So I did a lot of study on what is nationalism, and that's why I was opposed to some of the usages that you've presented of nations and nationalism. Nationalism, there was I believe it was John Sullivan wrote a book on nationalism. And in there, he basically said a nationalist argument is three principles. One, a people with a unique characteristic exists. Two, the interests of that people is more important than anything else. And three, they must have freedom and self-determination to the greatest extent possible. So when I say nationalism, I mean those three particular ideas. White nationalism is there are a particular group of people with unique characteristics, and it is just being pasty skinned to me is not enough. It has to be a cultural definition. And so, embracing that culture is a sophisticated culture. It is the culture that's created the world we live in today. And it can continue doing that as it adapts. It needs to adapt. New technologies, new threats and risks arise, and we have to be ready to deal with those. But we can do that.
And how do we motivate people to join us? I mean, because we remember that we've got to give them a prospect of a literally better life, and merely favoring ourselves and even our culture. What specific steps economically and socially
So that's
could
the other
could
reason
we
why
do that would
I believe it's valuable to continue with the natural rights viewpoint. I think people understand what it means, and they understand the kind of society that it represents or that is represented by it. We're asking for the continuation of that kind of society that has been part of, the United States, North America, Western culture. So I'm just going to use an example. So Nazis are trying to sell a new religion, right? So they're trying to sell you National Socialism. And in order to do that, you have to reject everything you ever knew before and adopt this new religion. And once you adopt that new religion, and the new religion is what needs to be defended, then they're claiming that your life will start being better, or it'll create an unstoppable movement. I don't believe that's very compelling to me.
well, certainly not phrased quite that way, but you don't talk about proselytizing a new religion. You just do the elements of it. There has to be a coherent moral code, and you were mentioning that. You were saying that it's not just uh, pasty skin, and it certainly
Right.
isn't.
It has to be cultural.
It's got to be values, and that's one. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we've got is that very few people share a common set of values right now.
I
And
disagree. Well, so I think that's Yes, that's partly true. For you and I, we grew up in a school system that continued on the traditional American heritage and identity. I think since the 70s, they've been trying to downplay that. Um, but I think we can appeal to people. I mean, in my own activism, that's what I try to do. I try to rekindle the identity that we have as heritage America, as real Americans, as Euro Americans, as I call it. Um, and so my task is to put on cultural events, put on community events, real community events, not just let's get together and drink a bunch of beers together. Um, People, and it gets back to the psyops idea. So the way that what psyops does is it tries to break the will of an opposition by reducing their ability or willingness to fight. So how has our opposition done psyops against us? Well, they've attacked us as representing us as extremely negative, that we are basically degenerate elements within society. So we have to stop. We cannot be degenerate elements. We have to be true representatives of our culture and our society. And I think people recognize that. So again, in my own activism, I put on cultural events. There are community associated events. People come. We all get together. We chat. We have a good old time. It applies for all ages, children, adults, um, and both men and women. And I tell the American story to them, so they now become and understand and realize. So they have a living involvement in their community. They understand the basis of that community, and they can carry it forth. But all of that's been taken since the 70s, I would say. So your average American doesn't know what it's like to belong to a real community anymore. Well, we can give it to them. So if anything, white nationalism, it's the real community. How about that? Getting back to your slogan idea. We are a real community, and we can offer that to people. We're not just an online community, although we are online as well.
Except where? I mean, where could we offer a real community? I mean, there's nowhere
Out
in
of
the
your
United
house.
States.
That's how I do it. I invite not only your house, but you can rent halls. You can go to parks. What we do is, just as an example of what my activism is, out of my house, I invite people over. We get together. I hire musicians sometimes, and every time I put on American history presentations. Again, this is who we are, and so build and continue our identity. That has to be an extremely positive. I mean, I've been involved with quote unquote the movement for a long time, and virtually every movement activity is a highly negative event. It's people complaining to each other. That can't be the basis of a community. There has to be something real that people want to involve themselves and promote, and that is real community. And they will do that, and they enjoy it. In the past, like I said, been involved with music. That's what we did with music. We hired bands, we put on a festival, we had vendors, we were selling identity products and other products. People, not only us, there were multiple vendors of products. People came, they had a great old time, they listened to music, they had a good time with the people of their community. And I think that that's the model that I've seen work, because I've easily get hundreds of people together to enjoy each other's company, and then they go home and they have a good time and they want to come back. So that's what I think. But I'm not saying just having a good old time is enough to change the world. You have to take that community and really, turn it also political. There needs to be political change. But my view is, in a society, the people who are actively involved in politics are only a small percentage. So 1 or 2%, if two out of 100 people, you only have a few people who want to be actively involved in politics. But you have to promote the community in order to have those politically activated people. And that's where I think I mean, whether it's due to psyops or just bad ideas, that's where I think our movement's failed. We've failed to bring in regular people and give them a good time. And I'm not saying we're all about just giving them a good time, but giving them something tangible and real, a real community that they belong to. I think people want that.
We're probably at a close to a stopping point now, but I just want to read. We've been getting some comments from a fella named Jesse. He says he's from
Hi,
Georgia.
Jesse.
And I just want to read some of these comments here. We need a real one for sure. The communists in Denmark have a Christiana free town for over 50 years. They've squatted but now own a huge military base in the heart of the capital city. I
Yes.
don't know of one. Do you know what he's talking about? As I don't.
I mean, so the leftists have always done that. That's what the Paris Commune. It started with the Paris Commune. They formed they grab hold of a area of a city and convert it into their little village.
Okay, like what they did over in where was it? Was it in Portland?
The Chaz in Seattle. Yeah, that's what they always do. And then they've done that in Europe. There are areas in Europe where they own and control that region. And if you want to be a communist, guess what? There's a real in-life community you can go to. But if you want to be a white nationalist, where's that real life community?
Well, yeah, he writes now a little bit below. I feel like an IRL in a real life community. In an IRL community, you know everyone and what is expected from them. We need a small town with a bar, a gym, restaurants, private security, fountains, and squares. Okay,
and I say do that where you are right now. Don't wait for that to happen. Create it where you are. That's the way we're going to change the world when we do that. That you can, if you visit some other town, guess what? You have a little local community you can go visit and have a good old time and go back to your own community. We need to do this is my belief, and the activism that I personally am engaged in is building community.
Well, I mean, as I commented, I think the other night, one problem you'd run into with a small town with bar, gym, restaurants, private security, fountains, and squares, if it was overtly segregated, you'd end up yourself facing a lot of litigation.
You do it as a club, right? So you have a club, you get club land, you fence off that club, put in your little bar inside that club, whatever you want to do. You have your little picnic areas, and you invite people. And I'm not saying it's easy, but it's what we have to do.
It'd be roughly, I mean, even a small community is going to cost what, $100 million?
Not all at once. I mean, when it starts out, yes, it's going to be a few people getting together regularly, having a good old time. As more people involve themselves, then more resources become available to improve. And when, again, just using marketing analysis, that's what drives me. In a city of 500,000 people, which I think is a fairly typical size city, maybe not. If only 1%, and you're talking hundreds of people, and if you can make that 2 or 3 people, it pretty soon you're talking a few thousand people. So a few thousand people want this community, and we're not giving it to them. This is my particular type of activism that I'm involved with. If you want to do that in your area and you want help, contact me, and I'll work with you to make that happen where you are. Because it is possible. We're doing it where I am. Again, you have to find good people.
You're actually creating a club type community?
Yeah. I mean, right now we don't have property or anything like that, but we're working out of people's homes. We'll grow it. Again, I mean, the approach I'm taking is not so weird or unique. if you, for example, my parents were both Canadian, and there was a Canadian club in Los Angeles, and they owned their own park. And once they owned their park,
Is
they
that
could
over in
rent that.
Santa Monica? Is that over in Santa Monica? I
No,
think
no,
I know
no.
that. Is that over in Santa?
There's all sorts of them. This is what many other ethnic groups already do. We have to do the same thing, is my argument. We have to learn. Our plight of our national existence, our community's existence is not unique. Every community faces the same problems. We can learn, how did they solve these problems? They all congregate together. They provide themselves a good, wholesome community. They let that community grow. And eventually it becomes strong enough that they can start imposing their values on the political system.
Well, we've been going for an hour and 30 minutes, and I think it's a good place to stop here so we can make sure it gets
Okay.
uploaded. But Ed, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I think this is a really good discussion, and I mean, thanks for humoring my my weird ideas. And we need to do this regularly, because I like your philosophical approach and bringing in Aristotle and Nietzsche. It's exactly the sort of thing we need to do, because this is the way we restate Western civilization.
Yeah.
And
read books,
that
enjoy
is
your
what
culture.
the whole.
We have
This
an
is
amazingly strong culture. Embrace it and learn it, and share it with other people. That's what I would argue.
These are called good New Year's resolutions. And I just want to thank you for framing a very fine set of New Year's resolutions for the crowd here. And we will continue. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New
Ed,
Year.
I will see you Wednesday again
Sounds good.
with Sam, and we shall continue. But good night, everybody. Signing
Good
off
night.
for Legal Realism, Speak Free Radio, Charles Lincoln and Ed LeBoutier from New Orleans and Tucson. Both were at one point parts of the Confederate States of America.
Yeah.
Although Arizona was never actually admitted as a state. It was the only Confederate territory.
Yeah.
Good
That's
night,
true.
everybody.
Good night.